À l'ordre.
Order, please. This is the Subcommittee on International Human Rights on the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is occurring on December 7th, 2010. It is meeting number 37.
Lived in infamy some, 69 years ago. But today we have some very welcome guests with us who are here to talk about the unfortunate subject of the sexual abuse of women and children in situations of conflict. I believe focusing primarily on the DRC. Mr. Tuka is dealing with the DRC. Okay, I'll just shut up and read their names. From the Pearson Peacekeeping Center, Peter Miller, who's Vice President for Programs, and Sophie Toupin, who is a Project Officer from Entraide Missionnaire Denis Touga. And what we normally do is allow our witnesses a 10-minute opening statement and then go to questions. Am I right in assuming the two folks from Pearson will have one presentation, but we'll answer questions together? Perfect. Okay, and Mr. Touga separately. Well, in that case, I just encourage you to start. I'll remind our members that we are televised today, so be on your best behavior, and I invite our witnesses to begin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Peter Miller. I'm a retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer presently working with the Pearson Peacekeeping Center. And my comments will be based somewhat not only on my experience with the Pearson Peacekeeping Center, but also as a former police officer that served in 3 United Nations missions. And the subject today is sexual gender-based violence. And from my perspective of having lived it and seen it on a day-to-day basis since about 1996 in missions, I'd like to say that I sure wish we'd be doing a lot better. I sure wish I'd be seeing progress today compared to 1996 in Haiti, 2001, 2003 in East Timor. Many of the problems that existed back then we still see. Despite the passing of various Security Council resolutions, women continue to be sexually abused. Children are abused when they're walking to school, or women going to get water are being abused. They can't carry out some of the basic daily necessities without their lives being at risk or being sexually assaulted. It doesn't only happen in those countries that I mentioned, it's happening all over the world where there is conflict. In Sierra Leone, for example, they estimate that between 50 to 64,000 people, women and children, have been sexually assaulted. Bosnia and Herzegovina, 20 to 50,000. Rwanda, between 250 to 500,000 people, women in particular, have been sexually assaulted. The problem is not getting better, and I think one of the big issues there is the lack of the presence of women in police forces is one thing. The lack of women in the whole security sector is another issue, which is a major problem as well. Women don't have a voice in the whole justice system, the security sector. So there's a distinct need on that side in terms of integrating women into those processes. And although attempts have been made to improve the representation of women, still amongst police officers serving in UN missions, there are less than 10%. According to my colleague, I believe it's around 8% participation of women in peace operations today as police officers. The UN has set a target of some 20% by 2014. That will be a step in the right direction. However, there's a need for legislation in these countries. There's a need for laws to protect women and children, and we're just not there yet. The other issues, some of the other key issues, for instance, in Haiti right now, where I did serve previously, there are about 1.3 million people that have been displaced, presently living in IDP camps. And when people are living in IDP camps, women and children, they are even more vulnerable when they're living in their regular houses. It's an epidemic. Haiti in particular is in crisis right now. It's no secret. And something needs to be done to address this. There are women and children being raped every day. And as we're sitting here somewhere in the world, there's a woman being raped right now, most likely. With that, I'll just turn things over to my colleague to add a few comments.
Oui, donc...
Yes, thank you. I'm Sophie Toupin. As you can see, I am a project officer. The only point that I would like to add to Mr. Miller's presentation is this. It is the importance of remembering that human rights there are invisibility. They talk about political invisibility, socioeconomic rights, and so on. But human rights are a burning issue. The only way to reduce rather gender-based violence, sexual violence, is to have a global approach, an overall approach, a systemic approach, which was indicated in UN Resolution 1325, protection, participation, and re-establishment. I will stop here and we'll move on to the question period. Yes, thank you. Mr. Tuka, please, would you like to make your presentation? Thank you. I'm Denis Tuka. Thank you for inviting me to appear today. I am a missionary. I represent Entraide Missionnaire, which since 1990 has been working in the Great Lakes area. It is a community of missionaries that has been in place for a very long time. I will just follow what my predecessor has said by dealing with some concrete issues, and I can answer questions about it. With respect to what's going on in the Congo, I would like to come back to the Canadian program for the prevention of sexual violence in Eastern Congo, and I'd like to draw some lessons from that. At the same time, I want to illustrate to you what is being done there despite all the difficulties. You have certainly heard about the criticism with respect to the intervention of Canada and the international community when it comes to supporting women, but also when it comes to attempting to end the violence. I want to share some facts with you. There have been two interim reports of SDIR, a confidential report from SDIR that was obtained through access to information by the Canadian Federation of Graduate Women, and an independent project that was sponsored by Great Britain, Belgium, and Canada, called Idea Born, and it involves visits there on the ground. I'd just like to go over a few facts. Eileen Carroll in 2005 decided, she was Minister of Cooperation at the time, that $15 million should be paid out over 4 years. It was intended to reduce sexual violence, to prevent sexual violence, to help the victims, and to take into account and try to rehabilitate to those people who were the main actors in this. There were 5 different goals sought: prevent violence, take into account, take charge of the medical health issue system there, provide psychosocial training and socioeconomic readapting of the people there. There are 2 provinces there, North and South Kivu. They represent 14 territories, but they're huge. It would include Ottawa, Toronto, and it represents about 250 kilometers in width. We are looking now at the facts with respect to the creation of a joint project sponsored by the UN. There were 3 agencies that were involved in this, the FNAC, that is to say the UN Agency for Populations, UNICEF, and the High Commission, the UN High Commission for Human Rights merged with the United Nations Human Rights in the Congo mission. And this was occurring in Kinshasa. Everything to do with respect to women was handled through local NGOs in the country itself and by FUNAB. I can point out to you that where these projects can be found within the international framework, the projects had to be coordinated with what is called a joint structure that is supported, that involved all of the Congolese departments, 10 UN agencies, others as well, and NGOs, the major NGOs. At the provincial level there were committees set up to counter sexual violence. At the local level, as I say, it included the local authorities. With respect to the 14 provinces, the fight there continues. I don't have the time to go into great detail about it, but I can say that there is some improvement. But it is important to point out that Canada's decision was very important for the Congo. Canada was the first country to put in so much money at the time in 2005 during a particularly difficult passage in the history of Congo. And secondly, the incentive to do so jointly with Belgium was very important. Canada provided leadership with respect to the care that could be offered to the victims of sexual violence. With respect to results, statistical results, I can say that they are very impressive. I'll just give you a few examples. Some 21,897 victims who got health care provided to them after the fact, 22,471 who got psychosocial care provided to them, 2,820 participants were participating in activities that were revenue generating. There was the invention, if you like, of the mobile clinic as well. That was a Canadian invention, and that was extremely important. Canada has been very much criticized there by women's groups, though. I, for one, think this is a significant thing to note. I can tell you what women's groups have sent to me in writing. October 2007, this is mail that I got, and I'm quoting, since our country has been devastated by war, we have seen humanitarian and sustainable development aid arrive to help people who are vulnerable and to help with those people who have been displaced. But the national or so-called local NGOs without sufficient means have helped these victims as well. To set up humanitarian aid. The same organizations, local organizations, supply data with respect to the unfolding of the projects. But once the projects are funded, the local NGOs don't want to cooperate in carrying out the projects. A year later, when a delegation of SIDA went over there to meet with people who are at Uvira, which is a very important center, I can say the Canadian delegation said that there was a special visit for that. The meeting left the participants very dissatisfied and discouraged because they didn't have a long enough meeting. Curiously, there was no visit from the beneficiary NGOs, rather there was no visit of the beneficiary NGO offices to see what was being done with the money. End of quote. A year ago now, December 2009, a meeting in Goma where 20 organizations got together to call for an end to sexual violence. And I quote, "It's essential for national and international stakeholders to share a common vision and to take into account the reality of the victims of sexual violence, their immediate needs, their rights, and the long-term goals to help them in the future. The victims should be part of the decision-making process at every stage. We want to represent the victims and we want to hear what they have to say." Why are there recurring criticisms? Well, it comes back to the fact that nobody is listening to what the women's groups are saying, and that doesn't reflect reality. Two of the main goals that were supposed to be espoused by the program. Now, how can I explain this? Canada's choice to go through UN agencies rather than to deal directly with groups from civil society, national or local NGOs, institutions, churches rather, who have already been working in the area. That would simplify the management by SDIR, fewer human resources involved, and a lightened burden, if you like, for the agencies that are there. The project was envisaged as one of an emergency situation, an emergency response. But what can be done on an ongoing national basis? These emergency situations that are lasting forever for such a long period of time should be looked at a little more closely. Let me speak now to the problems that exist in terms of coordination and harmonization that have been poorly assessed. Each agency of the UN has its own structures, its own methods, its own instruments. Here's an example. To identify the victims of sexual violence in that area, there were 12 different forms that had to be filled out, that could not be coordinated. And also the dilution of funds. Canada sent funds to FNAP, to New York, and then through New York to a little village in the Congo. But there were a lot of middlemen. I can give you an example of the negative consequences. This is something that I draw from a report that was made in the relation between the agencies and the different partners that are supposed to be executing the projects. Not all partners are housed together. There are some contractors, and there's a cascading, if you like, of contracts, of subcontracting. In this sub-delegation and sub-sub-delegation and subcontracting and sub-subcontracting, there are consequences. And the funds are eaten up. Less funds are available for those people who are in direct contact with the victims. Associations are benefiting. The major organizations are benefiting the most. The major ones, the international ones, are getting the lion's share of the funds, and less is reaching the people. Despite the good intentions at the outset, the project was not implemented according to what was best for the needs of the local groups. I am going to quote the assessment report now. The holistic approach that has to be adopted with the victims of sexual violence must be built in terms of the needs of the victim, taking into account the context, not in terms of the needs of the organizations and the agencies. A second point I want to leave with you is the individual approach with respect to sexual violence, as is seen in Western countries, is inadequate and does not work well in the Congolese context. The medical care that each victim receives, it will be done one by one, even though there would be 200,000 victims. However, the psychosocial follow-up their accompaniment in the community and their reinsertion in the community is got to be done individually. The project wanted to implant the method of individual counseling for each of the victims, but it's impossible in the African context. Just like here in Canada, the people wanted to do for the Aboriginal peoples. There is a telling comparison that can be made. So, I would like now to quote the result of this. It is a community participation and the will of the stakeholders which has allowed for the good results that have been obtained. Without community participation, if you'd had to pay counselors, psychosocial agents, and so on, you would not be able to retain the same level of resources. This is what's happened when some of the women's groups in the villages had more freedom. They applied their own methods of counseling, group accompaniment for the victims of sexual violence. In the Idea Born report, you can see that there is a totally different approach to the approach that is being promoted on the ground by the international agencies. And I think this difference should be noted. Let me conclude by saying that the results, these are the results of the Canadian project, like other projects, but the projects are ongoing. But what is different is you have the armed forces of the Republic of Congo that is inflicting pain upon the people. The goals of the government, which a funded project, was to support the victims and to prevent this type of gender-based violence, have not been achieved. Why? I think there needs to be an assessment. The evaluation of the project, the joint project indicates that in these activities, women who have been violated are almost always considered victims without any recourse. It's not considered a war crime. It's not considered something that could be brought before the courts. And this is something that has to be considered by militant women's groups where there can be a change of view. What was put in the legislation has not become a part of the mores of the society. We have bilateral agreements to build roads, to build schools, and to put in policies. But applying the same standards for sexual violence has diluted what the goal sought can achieve. Let me say that it is praiseworthy, but the way in which the results are assessed on an objective basis, if you look at each of the dimensions of it, indicate clearly that the policies have been totally depoliticized. And in the context of the Congo, sexual violence is political. It's not in Canada, not the international community that will solve the problems that exist in Congo. It is the Congolese themselves that will have to do so. However, with programs for support, for help, we want to see what we do truly contribute to what is being done by them. Very simply put, we want to see more power go back to into the hands of the Congolese. I know I've taken a lot of time. I would have other suggestions and proposals to make that could be very specific for Canada to follow in the Congolese context. Thank you, Mr. Tuka. Thank you to all our witnesses.
Question and answer rounds. I'm going to try to end this just a wee bit early because there's a matter that Mr. Marsden has discussed with me that I think ought to be dealt with at the end of this meeting. I want to leave enough time for it. I'm also going to take advantage of thank you. Okay, we've also got another motion that could be introduced by Mr. Hebert. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I've got the floor right now to ask a question to Mr. Miller. One of the problems we've had in dealing with this subject, I think it's a problem that everybody has to deal with this subject, is that unlike mass killings, where it's actually relatively easy, all things considered, to figure out how many victims there were. I mean, there can be efforts to hide them, as there were at places like Ketin, for example, but it's very hard to actually hide the evidence, the numerical, statistical evidence of how many people have been killed. The problem is that we tend not to get hard numbers when it comes to sexual abuse, rape, and so on. You mentioned some relatively hard numbers. They were round figures, obviously, but 50,000 in Bosnia, somewhere between 250,000 and 500,000 in Rwanda. And just so that we know, is there a centralized source of this kind of data? That's my first question. And then related to that, number two, are these referring to, should we assume these are numbers of victims or numbers of incidents?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The figures that I quoted to you come from UNIFEM, and they are constantly monitoring these situations. But as we all know, figures with respect to rape, sexual abuse, and so forth are probably on the very low end. It's one of the crimes that's the least reported. There's a good reason for that. Women feel very uncomfortable with having a male police officer coming to see them and going through a justice system that's predominantly male as well. There's not a great comfort level, and myself, having investigated these types of crimes, I can tell you that when we suddenly had women police officers in my organization, we could tell the difference right away. The male police officers could tell that the comfort level of the victims was there, which was not there before. So that's a big factor. These figures, I am sure, are on the very low side.
All right, thank you. That's very helpful. We'll now go to the Liberal Party, and I see that Professor Kotler will be starting out. So you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will follow up right from your question as well, which was something that I was going to ask. But je vais poser la même question.
I will ask the same question to Peter Miller and to Sophie Toupin. If there's time, I'll ask Denis Tuga a question as well.
Of sexual violence as really having a universal dimension. Examples you gave us, Sierra Leone, Bosnia, and Rwanda are only some of the examples. As you mentioned, one can go into, as you know, only better than any of us in DRC, Sudan, and the like. And you mentioned in terms of problems, two basic problems. The lack of women in both police forces and security forces, and the need to integrate women into these processes, and the situation, the particular vulnerability in displaced camps such as 1.3 million in Haiti. Madame Toupin, vous avez parlé d'une approche globale.
Madame Toupin, you talked about the global approach of the government.
It really is. What are the main impediments? Quels sont les obstacles, principaux obstacles?
What are the main impediments?
In Sudan and Pakistan, to the protection of women and children from sexual violence. Les principaux obstacles lorsqu'il s'agit de...
The main impediments when it's a matter of protecting women and children from sexual violence.
Specific, if I may. First, are there laws or government policies? Qu'il y a des lois, politiques gouvernementales
Are there laws or government policies that impede?
from sexual violence? Question number one. Est-ce qu'il y a des lois, des politiques gouvernementales, laws or government policies that foster an environment, qui favorise un environnement où les femmes et les enfants sont des victimes de
Where women and children are victims of sexual crimes?
this sexual violence?
Thank you, Mr. Cotler. Some of the main obstacles in this regard seem to be that the countries that we're working in and we're visiting, and last week I was in Uganda speaking to the head of the police from South Sudan, and when I asked him, what is the biggest challenge that you face, he didn't talk about referendum security. He talked about sexual gender-based violence, and that they need international assistance to help them to train their police officers. And he did mention that it goes beyond the police force as well. It points to the justice system to have the necessary laws to ensure the prosecution of these people, the court system as well. And so there's a lot of structural impediments. You're talking about many new countries. In East Timor, where I worked, they had no laws when they started, basically. And so that was an opening for people to just have carte blanche to go and do as they saw fit. So those are some of the impediments. The PPC, Pearson Peacekeeping Center, has been doing a lot of work in Sudan, in the UNAMID missions and the Sudan mission as well, UNMISS, in training police officers how to investigate sexual gender-based violence. Not only training the local police officers, but also training the UN police officers as well, coming in from around the world and not having the necessary experience themselves to investigate. So this is one of the big impediments, is not having the appropriate expertise to investigate these very serious crimes. I'll pass it on to Sophie. She may want to add something.
En fait, par rapport au...
With respect to the laws that you were mentioning, in 2008, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 1820, which deals with sexual violence. And as you know, a Security Council resolution obliges the states to put into effect nationally at the national level what is contained in the resolution. So the Council said to the member states that they had to put into place action plans to ensure that there would be the creation and implementation of the resolution's contents. There are 22 countries at the present time that have these action plans. Haiti doesn't have one, Sudan doesn't, but Liberia has one. Canada, as you know full well, certainly has an action plan. It was launched October 5th last. Thus, you have to encourage and accompany those states to set up action plans and then encourage them to implement what is contained in the plan. What else can I say to you? Well, with respect to the obstacles, the impediments, yes, that was the first question. In Haiti, the proximity in camps is a problem. In the displaced persons camps, the camps that were created are full to overflowing. People there, women and children, are living 18 to a tent. So proximity means that sexually violent acts are committed more frequently in a situation like that. The policewomen that are on foot patrol are there, but it's very important, as Mr. Miller said, some 10% of the policewomen there participate in this project. 10% isn't a great deal, but we do hope that through the efforts of the United Nations, in partnership with other countries, there will be an improvement. We hope to reach a 20% level of police women by 2014.
So we've got to go to Madame Deschamps, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, there's a great deal to talk about here. Many questions come to mind further to your presentations, so I will go directly to Madame Toupin. With respect to the projects, with respect to the training of more women to be involved in peacekeeping, we have heard that they represent less than 10% of the force. You must have a funding program there. Is that an internal in-house funding program, or will there be a basis to build on to reach your goal and to see that a project like this is not threatened? I'm going very quickly. I'm just going to pop over to Mr. Tuga now and say to him, in a summary, from what you said, civil society is not being consulted enough. You're saying that the civil society is not being taken into consideration adequately with respect to the culture, the mores of the countries, and so on. And so that means that the results are not the results that we could have had, that had been sought in this project, the $15 million that the federal government has advanced. Well, in the government's action plan that came out when it was seeking a seat on the Security Council, what was said was this: it was a good plan that contained many pious wishes, motherhood issues, but there was little about the funding and the clear objectives to reach the goals that were elucidated in the plan. Do you have any comments? Yes, with respect to funding and the core funding from the federal government, we have until April 1st, 2012. After that, we don't know what's going to happen. But we have other funding from other governments, which, for other projects, in particular, projects that are intended to strengthen the capacity of the policemen and women who are involved in peacekeeping. Well, other levels of government, you mean? Yeah, but the funding that ends in 2012 is from the federal government. Is that right? Exactly. Is it my turn? Yes. You summarize it, but perhaps in a very restricted way. One of the major criticisms that is heard, and you were right, is that the capacity of the groups that are there in the country are not taken sufficiently into account. We believe that they're doing right in certain aspects, but the groups that are there are thought to be there to learn from us. But that's not the current way of thinking. That's the 60s way of thinking. We're there with our money, and they say, we were there when the troubles began. You come here with your money, and then you're going to go back to where you came from, but we'll still be here with the problems. This is what we are told. Even though it's difficult to analyze and it takes time, you have to be able to find a way to use the groups that are there. My next point is this. This issue is not totally depoliticized. But it can be done. Canada can do so. Michael Jean was able to do that. The highly placed persons that were in the militia before are still highly placed persons, and we know that they are charged with and in fact commit rape on a widespread basis. The United States, if they were to denounce it, that's one thing, but if Canada were to denounce it, it would be accepted by the people. It might be symbolic, but it's important. Canada has criticized the Congo, the DRC, with respect to the climate, to prevent the Le Club de Paris, the Club of Paris, from using the Congo. That created a scandal in the Congo. Canada did so, but then the scandal passed. So people adjusted. Well, what about this action plan? The action plan that the government has announced in response to the resolution that I cited. I should point out that Canada is one of the very important countries that gets involved in justice with respect to sexual violence and violence involving the army. This is necessary. It absolutely has to be done. The European Union is going to soon develop an overall a comprehensive plan for justice. Canada is going to have to join it and reiterate its specific viewpoint. So you come back, you have more hope, do you? Well, with respect to the action plan, I think we have to build on what exists at the present time. We have to see that plans are implemented. To do so, you might, for example, set up a group, a working party of NGOs, researchers, workers who would work with the officials, the people from the departments who have responsibilities with respect to the action plan in question, to work along with them, to make recommendations to them, so to see that it's really implemented. So a working party might be one solution. If you were to add more women, it's very hard to see these statistics representing all of the cases of women being abused. Some are hidden, some aren't reported. In these countries in conflict, we know that the figures must be higher. But adding women on staff, involving more women would probably make for a more understanding atmosphere. Women who have been raped may well speak more freely to a woman than to a man who's investigating. Yes, I was in Haiti, and for some weeks I followed the work of the police women that were foot patrolling in the camps, and I saw the role and the impact that they had. They established trust with the women who had been victims of violence of all kinds. I wanted to make a documentary on these, and I did so. It's on our website, these police women, to highlight the important role that they are playing. I encourage you to take a look at that film on our website. And I can tell you that a woman who has undergone violence has more difficulty speaking her mind to others, but it's easier for her to speak to a woman than to a man. Mr. Mark.
And we've had a number of witnesses before us here, and one of the things that seems to come through in the testimonies we received, that in conflict or wars where sexual assaults are a tool of war, it seems that it also spreads into society. And many of the societies that we've heard about, women in particular are demeaned in that society prior to any of this. It sounds too as if in some of the conflicts the military leadership are at least ignoring, if not encouraging, this activity because of the stain it puts on that other tribe or that other group. It was said at a previous meeting how women were targeted. Well, I would suggest it's the men that are actually targeted, and the women's the vehicle that they get to the community, to the men. By if you have a society where the women are shunned following an attack on them, there's no fault of their own, that there's nobody is there to catch them. Listening to the testimony here today, talking about the efforts that are done to help them at that point, I'm really quite curious as to the other side. Is what efforts are there to change the thinking, both at the military level and the society level, to first of all value women? And I would suggest to you that putting women into positions that you're referring to is certainly a part of that process. But it sounds to me like it has to be a much broader educational process, if anybody would like to comment.
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mr. Marston, for your comments. Much of these abuses, you're rightfully pointed out, occur even before the conflict. Also, obviously, during the conflict and after the conflict, quite often this type of behavior, it seems like it's almost a declaration of open season on women that comes out. We have to do something about that. A lot of it is education. It starts in the schools. It's also in the Department of Health as well. Also, NGOs can be of tremendous assistance, and also the justice system. The training of police officers, the hiring of women, it has to be attacked from many different fronts. And what you need is a national strategy, similar to what some countries are doing in trying to combat, for example, anti-corruption. It has to be attacked from many different fronts if you want to be successful. It's not just putting more women police officers on the street. That will make a little bit of a dent, but it goes far beyond that.
Mr. Tugas, you talked before about the victims. One of the things we heard in testimony recently was that the victims have reached the point where they don't want to deal with this anymore. They're tired of being paraded as a victim with nothing following up. Do you know of anything specifically that's happening to address that?
Oui.
Yes. Yes. Other programs have been set up, inter alia, making the victims part of the process of bringing the community together. They did this in 87, 86, rather 96, 97 with CEDA. This was not the case, but they're not trying to hide it now. They're going to show what happened to them, not just working with the victims alone, but working with a group of women, including them. There are Catholic organizations in 3 territories that are doing that, and it's very successful. The women participate in educational literacy, or rather it's the association that participates in economic literacy and educational activities. Let me come back to your first question. Rape wasn't something that was common before 96 in the Congo. It happened from time to time, and what prevented it wasn't the pressure, but the moral conviction and the tradition of the leaders. You wouldn't allow someone to be raped in your village. But the militia enrolled people, young people, and they became rich as an army. They defied the authority of the church, defied traditional authority, and made fun of this traditional authority. And so everything blew up. The acts that you have heard about are not acts of sexual desire. When you rape a woman in front of her husband or other people, it's that you want to break something, you want to destroy. And it's very efficient, unfortunately. In the Congo, they are starting to have this type of reaction. Women, rather than hiding, when there's massive rapes, like in September in Walikali, 300 women in a small village, the husbands, instead of throwing them out, casting them off, got together and said, this is an attack against us, men, our women, our wives. This is a way of seeing it.
My point is the fact that it is an attack on the men. It certainly is the total abuse and humiliation of the women, but the goal was to disrupt the society, to disrupt the community, and leave an ongoing damage after they've left. Have any of you had any dealings with Afghanistan? We had testimony just at the last of our hearings about a particularly nasty thing that's occurring there, what they call boy dance, where the young men are paraded dressed as girls and dance for a few hours and then are sold off to the highest bidder, and that's occurring in police stations. So, but if you haven't had that, I'll just pass on that one. But do I have much more time, Mr. Chair?
You have 1 more minute, Mr. Marston.
Well, that works.
Use it wisely.
How effective overall do you say 1325 is? Are we seeing results? The United Nations, of course.
Well, Mr. Marston, we are seeing results. I think 1325 was the first of, I believe, 4 Security Council resolutions, and each of the subsequent ones built on the first one. We are seeing progress, but it is painfully slow, unfortunately. We need more of an international response to this. Canada has stepped forward and has funded the Pearson Peacekeeping Centre to do some work in some of these countries, educating police officers, giving them the tools to investigate. But you know, we're not bumping into a lot of other countries when we're out there doing that, that are also involved in trying to deal with the issue as well. And I think we need a greater international response.
Just one point, Mr. Chair. That would be that we've heard that funding is ending in 2012 from the Canadian government. Perhaps a consideration for our recommendations might be that that funding continue.
All right. Hopefully colleagues have taken that into account. We now move to Mr. Sweet and then Mr. Hebert. They're going to split their time. So 3.5 minutes each. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will be brief due to the fact that we have business that we need to take care of, although this business is crucially important as well. I wanted to ask Madame Taupin, you had mentioned about a video that's on the site. Of course, we'll access that. But what country is that? Were the camps in where the policewomen were patrolling the camps?
Oui, donc dans le...
Yes, in the video you can see policewomen who are in MINUSTA in Haiti and who are on foot patrol in the camps. But the video also deals with the situation of women in Omnis, in the Sudan. So you can see Sudan and Haiti as case studies, if you like, and the impact that these women have.
That we're dealing with. There would need to be some. Well, just the fact of a woman wearing a uniform would also be a serious issue in some of these cultural circumstances, and you need to provide added protection for them. Mr. Miller. One of the challenges that I see, and I certainly I laud the goal of 2014 of 20% of the security and police forces being women, but I don't know of any police force right now or any military that has a 20% ratio of women. So is there some significant strategies in the plan to make sure that that capacity is built up in police? It would be police establishments there that were present locally as well as the UN forces?
There is. Just in terms of Canada, we have we're working in 25 countries in Africa right now through funding of the Government of Canada and the Government of Germany. And one of our top priorities, when we go in and we speak to the ministers of, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of the Interior, responsible for the police, and in fact the head of the police force as well, we talk to them about increasing their participation in peacekeeping, and in particular, we encourage the participation of women in peacekeeping. In several of these countries that we went to in Africa, it's a big issue, it's a big problem, because they don't even have women in their organizations. So how can they deploy them on peacekeeping operations? We have been successful in several cases of having institutions, police institutions, change their regulations and start hiring women for the first time in over 100 years. So that's a step in the right direction. We continue to pursue that and work with countries to try to encourage that and, in fact, to increase their participation as well. there are some tremendous examples out there of countries that are contributing close to 30% of women, and I think of Nigeria, I think of Ghana that come to mind. These are significant contributors. South Africa is another one. But I'll tell you, for the most part, the numbers are very, very poor. They are the exceptions, and there's not very many that, in fact, are contributing over 20%.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your expertise and your care as well. I was just going to say, finally, Mr. Chair, because of the time, Mr. Tugas had mentioned that he had other proposals, and also he had mentioned some NGOs that were contracted and then didn't deliver the services. And so I understand that there may be some confidentiality in the communication that he got from the localities that are expressing their concern around that. But I would hope if he has some names of those NGOs, because if there's countries making investments in them and they're not doing the work, then we need to know that. If he would table those with the clerk, that would be great.
If that's possible, Mr. Tugas, we would very much appreciate that. If there's any confidentiality concerns, we can treat those as documents that will only be looked at in camera.
Je ne parlais pas de...
I wasn't talking about Canadian NGOs. You'd be surprised, though, to see the methods that exist in the villages in the Congo to de-traumatize people in certain villages. I met representatives of American, German, and international NGOs that were using the California technique of eyes that move from side to side. You make the eyes move from side to side, and this is a way that works okay in the U.S. To de-traumatize people that have been traumatized, but in the Congo, that has no meaning. No meaning. But these people are being funded abundantly. It's this type of example that I was speaking about. The victims, the villages, accept these NGOs because they don't get any other type of help. But in actual fact, it's like Martians that they've got before them. It's meaningless.
Mr. Hebert, you've got a minute and a half.
No, thank you.
Okay, you're going to pass. All right. In that case, I do have one last question myself that was suggested to me by our analyst, Melissa Radford. She just wanted me to ask you, Mr. Miller, as a former RCMP officer yourself, if you had any knowledge as to the number of female officers that the RCMP is deploying abroad. I gather there's about 100 officers all told deployed abroad at any given time. Do you have any idea as to what percentage of those would be women?
I wouldn't be able to give you, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, an accurate figure because there's so many rotations of police officers in and out. I do know, though, for a fact that when I was serving in mission myself, the RCMP tried to keep their numbers up to a good level, and at any given time, usually it was around 10% that they had at that time. Now, that goes back several years ago, but they are making efforts in trying to recruit more women. The problem is, women police officers are also needed here in Canada, and it's to get them released by their commanding officers that sometimes is difficult, and the same problem exists in other countries as well. They're a very valued asset within your police force, and therefore you might be a little reluctant to release them.
Thank you very much. It was very helpful. And thank you to all of our witnesses. We'll ask you please now to feel free to leave. We have to turn to a couple of items of committee business. And, oh, just a moment. Madame Deschamps, s'il vous plaît.
Juste une petite question de procédure, Monsieur le Président.
Question of procedure. I don't know if it's normal, but Mr. Tuga, in his presentation, referred to reports several times. I'm wondering if it's in the rules. Could we ask him to table the documents that he referred to here with the committee?
Sans problème, je vous les ferai parvenir.
No problem. I'll send them to you. They're available. Thank you.
We turn now to two other items of business. The first one, I think what I'll do is just go directly to Mr. Marsden and invite him to take the floor for a moment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm sure that the government side is well aware of the Said Malikpour, the web programmer in Iran, has been sentenced to death. I don't have a motion, but one of the things I think that this committee could be doing is calling upon the Iranian government to set aside the death sentence. In my experience, and I'm sure people around this table will be aware that in most countries, Muslim countries, if there's a sentence of death, it's carried out very, very rapidly. If it's delayed for any reason, then there's usually an opportunity. They're trying to make a political statement, and so since this young man's been held since 2008 and he was just sentenced on last Saturday, I would suggest that there's a possibility of some intervention here. I'm sure the government's doing all it can, but something from this committee may be well worthwhile. Now, if we can't do it today, then I'll try to get a motion ready to bring back to the next, but I don't think it has to be that comprehensive, other than to say, that we are shocked at the sentence that's been pronounced on this individual and ask them to set it aside.
And just, I don't think, Mr.
Suspend and just go into camera for a frank dialogue on this.
Yes, so the motion to go in camera, all in favor? Okay. Let's go in camera. Yeah, we got to suspend for a moment.